The feminist movement has led to profound changes, granting women the right to vote, expanding educational and professional opportunities, and challenging traditional gender norms. These victories, however, were not without their flaws. Early efforts often excluded marginalized groups, leaving wage disparities, workplace harassment, and underrepresentation unaddressed. Rather than a failure, feminism and its reluctant willingness to evolve according to the politics and challenges that arise must be viewed as an ongoing struggle that adapts to societal changes while continuously striving for inclusivity. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, pioneers like Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony fought for women's suffrage, which culminated in the 1920 ratification of the 19th Amendment in the US simultaneously. Emmeline Pankhurst and others in the UK led their own suffrage movement. By mid-20th century, figures like Betty Friedan, Patsy Mink, and Margaret Sanger furthered women's rights through critical legislation, including the Equal Pay Act of 1963, Title Roman IX in 1972, and the Roe v. Wade decision in 1973 that protected reproductive rights. These efforts broadened women's rights across education, the workforce, and their bodies. Feminism has evolved into multiple incarnations over time, each reflecting the changing social, political, and cultural landscapes. This evolution occurs in waves because each period of feminist activism emerges in response to specific historical contexts and challenges. For instance, the first wave arose during a time when women were fighting for basic legal recognition, such as the right to vote and own property, amid rapidly changing ideas about citizenship and democracy. As societies transformed through industrialization and modernization, new forms of inequality and exclusion surfaced, sparking the second wave, which addressed workplace discrimination, reproductive rights, and cultural norms that confined women to traditional roles. Subsequent waves have been fueled by further shifts, such as increased awareness of intersectionality, digital connectivity, and global activism. These waves build on earlier gains and respond to the unique challenges of their times, making feminism a dynamic, ever evolving movement that continually redefines its priorities in the face of ongoing social, political, and cultural change. First wave feminism. Emerging in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, this wave focused on legal issues, primarily suffrage and property rights. Pioneers like Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony, and Emmeline Pankhurst fought for women's right to vote and to be recognized as equal citizens. Second wave feminism. From the 1960s through the 1980s, the focus expanded to include workplace equality, reproductive rights, and challenging traditional gender roles. Figures such as Betty Friedan and Gloria Steinem critiqued societal norms, advocating for broader cultural change alongside legal reforms. Third wave feminism. In the 1990s and 2000s, feminism became more intersectional, recognizing that race, class, sexuality, and gender identity shape women's experiences. This wave challenged the notion of a single woman's experience, with voices like Bell Hooks and Kimberly Crenshaw emphasizing diversity and individual agency. Fourth wave feminism. Emerging in the 2010s and propelled by digital activism, this wave is characterized by its focus on combating online misogyny, sexual harassment, and embracing inclusivity. It emphasizes intersectionality and global solidarity, striving to make feminism accessible and relevant to all women. There are also various ideological strands, such as liberal, radical, socialist, eco, and postcolonial feminism, intersect these waves, each addressing different aspects of gender inequality. These incarnations highlight that feminism is a dynamic, evolving movement mostly committed to addressing the complex and layered nature of oppression. The latter half of the 20th century witnessed profound institutional reforms that transformed women's lives. Laws like the Equal Pay Act and Civil Rights Act laid the foundation for workplace equality, while Title Roman IX revolutionized educational environments by addressing discrimination. The Violence Against Women Act 1994 also strengthened protections, ensuring women had legal tools to fight abuse and gender based violence directly impacting women's safety and health. Despite these achievements, there remains significant opposition. Patriarchal forces, including conservative political groups and religious institutions, historically resisted change, arguing women should remain in the private sphere. Recently, political shifts have threatened to undo gains, with challenges to reproductive rights and workplace protections making the need for vigilant activism more urgent. Issues like the wage gap, gender based violence, and intersectional discrimination further remind us that equality is incomplete. Within feminism, the divide between mainstream groups and factions like SWERF's trans exclusionary and sex worker exclusionary radical feminists has often influenced policies. While SWERF's focus on preserving cisgender women only spaces, emphasizing biological determinism, contemporary feminism embraces a more inclusive understanding of gender. Removing barriers for all women, including sex workers and trans women, is essential to ensuring true equality. As a lifelong member of the National Organization of Women Now since the mid 80s, a member of no less than three local chapters of Now, all with different power, priorities, strengths, and capacity, a vocal supporter of intersectional feminism that is welcoming and inclusive, and a sex worker of almost 40 years, I've witnessed firsthand how the feminist movement has transformed our world and yet left many of us behind. While the one step forward, two steps back faltering approach opened doors, for some, feminist efforts sideline marginalized voices, including those of sex workers, transgender women, and women of color, rendering us disillusioned with the overall efforts. Even as laws improved safety and health through measures like the Violence Against Women Act, persistent issues such as wage disparities, workplace harassment, and underrepresentation remain. The movement's evolution has at times fostered complacency, assuming that legal victories signaled an end to the struggle for equality. This ongoing and contentious chapter in the influence of SWERFs, who insist on defining womanhood strictly in a narrow framework of biological essentialism, rejects the validity of transgender women's identities and the lived experiences of sex workers. This perspective argues that the fight for women's rights should be centered on cisgender, heterosexual women, often excluding others who don't conform to traditional notions of womanhood. Swerves maintain that the inclusion of transgender women and sex workers dilutes the feminist agenda, particularly in spaces dedicated to addressing gender based violence or protecting women's rights. As a result, this exclusionary stance creates tension within the feminist movement, with many advocating for a more inclusive, intersectional approach that recognizes a broad spectrum of identities and experiences, striving to ensure that all women, regardless of gender identity or occupation, are heard, valued, and protected. True liberation, however, demands that we embrace all of our diverse experiences, whether in the boardroom or on the street. Looking ahead, the ongoing fight for equality. The journey toward gender equality is far from complete. As we confront systemic issues and evolving opposition, our advocacy must be intersectional, examining the unique struggles of women from differing class, racial, and cultural backgrounds. We must continue reshaping societal attitudes, enforcing policies, and strengthening global collaboration to sustain progress globally. While women's rights have made significant strides, the struggle continues. The feminist movement, more inclusive and intersectional than ever, remains vital. It is not enough to rest on past victories. Every new challenge demands reinvigorated action and global solidarity to ensure that no woman is left behind in the fight for equity. Empowering every woman, regardless of background, requires collective responsibility and continuous movement forward. For 16 seconds. Looking ahead, our fight must be relentlessly intersectional and inclusive. We need policies that not only protect, but also empower every woman, irrespective of her background or occupation. Our collective future depends on global solidarity and a commitment to challenge both external oppression and internal exclusions. The journey is far from over. While we celebrate our transformative victories, we must also confront the enduring challenges with renewed vigor. It is our duty to ensure that every woman's voice is heard, every barrier dismantled, and every right defended. The struggle for equality continues stronger, more inclusive, and more vital than ever.